Committee will be in order. This morning we are very happy to welcome Secretary Chuck Hagel, Secretary of Defense. Sir, we're just really happy to have you. Since this is your first visit with our committee, we will place your biography and pertinent details in our permanent record, and along with your statement when we get to that point, which will be soon. Happy to welcome General Dempsey and Secretary Hale, who is, have been here numerous times. Probably Secretary Hale more than he would like to admit, but he has a heavy duty to go here. We have many challenges in our national defense and the threats around the world. One of our challenges is to be supportive of our military, to guarantee that our readiness is ready, to guarantee that our soldiers are provided with whatever supplies, whatever equipment, whatever technology they need, and whatever they need to protect themselves while they go about their mission. One of our challenges is we have just gotten the budget, and which we normally would get in February, but it's going to take us a little while to analyze it, but we're already hard at work on doing that. And General Dempsey, sir, it's always good to see you. Having come back from, two of us saw each other in Tampa just 2 weeks ago. It was good to see you all again. There was one thing I wanted to get you to comment when you're making your statements, if you would, or we can do it during the question and answer period. I noticed when I grabbed the budget, anxiously looking to see what I could pick out of it quickly, and I picked out the fact that there's no request for OCO money. And I'm a little curious about why that is, what the effect might be, how that might affect your transfer authority. But anyway, we can go into detail on that during our question and answer period. What we would like to do is to receive your statements. The entire statements will be placed in the record, and you can consolidate them any way you like. And so, Mr. Secretary, again, we're very happy to welcome you here today, and we'd ask you to well, before you do that, I notice Ms. Lowy is coming in. I'm going to see if she and Mr. Visklosky have an opening statement they'd like to make. Ms. Lowy is the ranking member on the Full Appropriations Committee, and Chairman Rogers will be here shortly. He's doing a speech on the floor right now. Ms. Lowy, did you have an opening comment?
You are very gracious, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you so much, and I'm delighted to be here to join with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to welcome Secretary Hagel. As the subcommittee readies its FY14 bill, we must keep in mind that $2.5 trillion in deficit reduction has been enacted already, the vast majority of which is within the jurisdiction of the Appropriations Committee. Even without sequestration, discretionary spending is on a path to be at its lowest percentage of GDP in the last 45 years. In next year's bill, we have to focus on helping the Department of Defense address very serious challenges, from winding down the war in Afghanistan to addressing threats from North Korea and flashpoints in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. That is why I am so dismayed that the discretionary levels in the House budget resolution have no chance of being enacted and are not workable solutions. We cannot ignore the reality that what happens in our non-defense budget has implications on our ability to defend this nation. As one example, General Alexander, the commander of U.S. Cyber Command and director of the NSA, has stressed the need to boost science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. At a time when China and others are graduating an increasing number of students in STEM fields, we must take a comprehensive approach to meet our future cyber and other security needs, not give other countries an even greater advantage. The budget request would fund the department at a level very close to the pre-sequester FY13 level. Pre-sequester FY13 level. It's a responsible proposal. I look forward to today's discussion, especially on key issues such as escalating cyber attacks, growing health costs, and assisting increasing numbers of servicemen and women transitioning out of service. Let me just say, if we want to grow our economy, if we want to create jobs, we want to ensure our national security, we need adequate investments to both the security and the non-security side of the budget. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing your testimony.
Mr. Visklowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hagel and General Dempsey, Mr. Hale, thank you very much for your consideration and appearing today. Your testimony is very important to the committee's deliberation. Mr. Chairman would ask, in the interest of time also, if my entire statement could be entered into the record. This is a difficult period for the Department of Defense and for all federal departments and agencies. Secretary Hagel, as you take on the responsibilities of Defense Secretary, one of your first tasks is coping with sequestration. We note that a significant portion of your prepared testimony is devoted to this problem, and we understand DoD will have to find about $41 billion in reductions for this purpose. The committee recognizes that you are about to take a number of very challenging actions in this regard. I would be remiss if I did also not suggest that Congress has responsibility here too. The department, as well as every agency of the federal government, was operating under a continuing resolution for the last 7 months. That also leads to great inefficiencies and burdens to you and everyone else that you represent today. That certainly, looking forward, needs to desist. But aside from sequestration, we recognize that this budget comes at a time of enduring fiscal challenges. Among the items in your budget, the budget protects personnel by including a modest pay raise, increasing housing and subsistence allowances, and requesting $8.5 billion in family-related programs. The budget also proposes increased enrollment fees and co-payments for the Department Health Program. I look forward to working in partnership with you on how to strike a balance between supporting personnel while at the same time controlling costs in this segment of the budget. And would simply conclude again that Congress has a responsibility here too. We look upon you, the General, Mr. Hale, and others to make very difficult decisions in your budget submission. We in turn are going to have to look to be a partner and make difficult decisions as well going forward. I certainly acknowledge that and look forward to your testimony. Again, thank you very much for your appearance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Visklowski. Mr. Secretary, sorry that we interrupted your statement, but we're prepared to hear from you. We're looking forward to your statement today.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm grateful, Mr. Chairman, for an opportunity to appear before this body this morning. Ranking Member Visklowski, thank you, and to all the members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. I got my start over on this side of the Capitol, working for a congressman who you came to this body with, John McCollister from Nebraska, both elected in 1870, was his chief of staff for 5 years. So I was grounded, I hope, in responsible governance on this side of the House, and have always appreciated that experience. As a young man, it did shape my view of the world and governance and responsibility. So I don't know if that gives me any additional credibility in this body, but nonetheless, I wanted to note that because it has been a big part of my life that I have drawn from for many years, and the different things I've done and the opportunities I've had. So thank you.
Well, Mr. Secretary, it means a lot to the chairman because John Y. McCollister was one of my closest friends when we came here together many, many years ago.
Well, he's doing well, and I will give him your regards.
Please do that.
He'll be pleased you asked. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Visklowski, and members of the committee, let me, before I begin my prepared remarks on the budget today, let me say a few words about what happened in Boston yesterday. Like all Americans, the thoughts and prayers of our people at DOD and all of Washington are with the people of Boston today, especially the families of the victims and those injured by what appears to be a cruel act of terror. As the President said yesterday, we still do not know who did this or why, and a thorough investigation will have to determine whether it was planned and carried out by a terrorist group, foreign or domestic. It's important not to jump to conclusions before we have all the facts. But as the White House said last night, any event with multiple explosive devices, as this appears to be, is clearly an act of terror and will be approached as an act of terror. The President has made clear that we will find out who did this, we will find out why they did this, and any responsible individuals or groups will be brought to justice. I'd like to commend local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for their quick response to yesterday's tragic events, and also express our gratitude to the members of the National Guard supporting the marathon who were among the first on the scene. I'm also mindful that many members of the military community had traveled to Boston to participate in this race, and our thoughts are with all of them today. The Department of Defense is prepared to respond quickly to any response for additional support from domestic law enforcement agencies. I will continue to consult closely with DoD senior leaders and my counterparts in other agencies on how we can best support the government's response and investigation. And Chairman Dempsey may have additional comments regarding this event as well. Mr. Chairman, I will now turn to my opening statement for this hearing. This year's 2014 budget request for the Department of Defense is, as Congresswoman Lowry noted, a budget that was put together over many months. An enterprise as large as the Department of Defense, $600 billion, is not collaborated with or on or numbers or budgets constructed in a matter of 2 or 3 months. And as we proceed in this hearing this morning, Mr. Chairman, we will get into some of the specifics of the budget and why some of the decisions were made on the basis of what the numbers will reveal and our responsibilities. Allow me to express my appreciation to this subcommittee for its continued support of our men and women in uniform and our civilian workforce. They are doing tremendous work, as you all know, and are making great sacrifices. They're making great sacrifices along with their families, as they have for more than 11 years of our nation's wars. Their dedication and professionalism are the foundation of our military strength. And as we discuss numbers and budgets and strategic priorities today, I know we will not lose sight of these men and women and their families serving across the globe at great sacrifice. As you all know, their well-being depends on the decisions we make here in Washington. Today, the Department of Defense faces the significant challenge of conducting long-term planning and budgeting at a time of considerable uncertainty, both in terms of the security challenges we face around the world and the levels of defense spending we can expect here at home. Even as the military emerges and recovers from more than a decade of sustained conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan, it confronts an array of complex threats of varying vintage and degrees of risk to the United States. These include the persistence of violent extremism throughout weak states and ungoverned spaces in the Middle East and North Africa, the proliferation of dangerous weapons and materials, the rise of new powers competing for new influences, the risk of regional conflicts which could draw in the United States, faceless, nameless, silent, and destructive cyber attacks, the debilitating and dangerous curse of human despair and poverty, as well as the uncertain implications of environmental degradation. Meanwhile, the frenetic pace of technological change and the spread of advanced military technology to state and non-state actors pose an increasing challenge to America's military. This is the strategic environment facing the Department of Defense as it enters a third year of flat or declining budgets. The onset of these resource constraints has already led to a significant and ongoing belt-tightening in military modernization, force structure, personnel costs, and overhead expenditures. It has also given us an opportunity to reshape the military and reform defense institutions to better reflect 21st century realities. The process began under the leadership of Secretary Gates. Secretary Gates canceled or curtailed more than 30 modernization programs and trimmed overhead costs within the military services and across the defense enterprise. The realignment continued under Secretary Panetta, who worked closely with the President and the Joint Chiefs of Staff to craft new defense strategic guidance and an FY 2013 defense budget plan, which reduced the Department's top line by $487 billion over the course of a decade. The President's request of $526.6 billion for the Department of Defense's base budget for FY 2014 continues to implement the President's defense strategic guidance and enhances the Department's efforts at institutional reform. Most critically, it sustains the quality of the all-volunteer force and the care we provide our service members and their families, which underpins everything we do as an organization. Before discussing the particulars of this budget request, however, allow me to address the profound budget problems facing the Department in FY 2013 and beyond as a result of sequester. The Congress and the Department of Defense have a responsibility to find answers to these problems together because we have a shared responsibility to protect our national security. DoD is going to need the help of Congress. We're going to need the help of Congress, this subcommittee, to manage through this uncertainty. The FY 2013 DoD Appropriations Bill, enacted by the Congress last month, addressed many urgent problems in our budget by allocating DoD funding more closely in line with the President's budget request, giving the Department authorities to start new programs, and allowing us to proceed with important military construction projects. Nonetheless, the bill still left in place the deep and abrupt cuts associated with sequester, as much as $41 billion in spending reductions over the next 6 months. Military pay and benefits are exempt from the sequester, and we made a decision to shift the impact of sequester away from those serving in harm's way. Furthermore, the military is experiencing higher operating tempos and higher transportation costs than expected when the budget request was formulated more than a year ago. As a result of these factors, the Department is now facing a shortfall in our operation and maintenance accounts for FY 2013 of at least $22 billion in our base budget for active forces. In response, the Department has reduced official travel, cut back sharply on facilities maintenance, imposed hiring freezes, and halted many other important but lower priority activities. However, we will have to do more. We will soon send to Congress a large reprogramming request designed to offset some of our shortfalls, especially shortfalls in wartime funding, and we ask your help with its speedy review and approval. This reprogramming will be limited by ceilings on transfer authority, and so can only solve part of the problem. We will have to continue to consider furloughing the civilian personnel in the months ahead. There will also be significant cuts in maintenance and training, which further erodes the readiness of the force and will be costly to regain in the future. As the service chiefs have said, we are consuming our readiness. Meanwhile, our investment accounts in the defense industrial base are not spared damage, as we also take indiscriminate cuts across these areas of the budget. We will continue to need the strong partnership of this committee to help us address these shortfalls. If the sequester-related provisions of the Budget Control Act of 2011 are not changed, the FY 2014 funding for national defense programs will be subject to a steeply reduced cap, which would further cut DoD funding by roughly $52 billion. And if there is no action by the Congress, roughly $500 billion in reductions to defense spending would be required over the next 9 years. As an alternative, the President's budget proposes some $150 billion in additional defense savings over the next decade. These cuts are part of a balanced package of deficit reduction. Unlike sequester, these cuts are largely backloaded, occurring mainly in the years beyond FY 2018, which gives the Department time to plan and implement the reductions wisely and responsibly, anchored by the President's defense strategic guidance. Now let me turn to the details of the President's budget request. The $526.6 billion FY 2014 budget request continues to balance the compelling demands of supporting troops still at war in Afghanistan, protecting readiness, modernizing the military's aging weapons inventory, and in keeping with the President's strategic guidance and sustaining the quality of the all-volunteer force. Today's budget request also contains a placeholder request, Mr. Chairman, for overseas contingency, OCO, at the FY 2013 level, $88.5 billion. The submission does not include a formal OCO request because Afghanistan force levels and deployment decisions for this year were delayed in order to provide commanders enough time to fully assess requirements. We will soon be submitting an OCO budget with the revised spending level and account level detail. The base budget being presented today continues the Department's approach of the last several years. First, to target growing costs in areas of support, acquisition, and pay and benefits before cutting military capabilities and force structure. This budget identifies new savings of about $34 billion in FY 2014 through 2018, including $5.5 billion in FY 2014 from all of these areas. In order to maintain balance and readiness, the Department of Defense must be able to eliminate excess infrastructure as it reduces force structure. DoD has been shedding infrastructure in Europe for several years, and we are undertaking a review of our European footprint this year. But we also need to look at our domestic footprint. Therefore, the President's FY 2014 budget request authorization for one round of base realignment and closure, BRAC, in 2015. BRAC is a comprehensive and fair tool that allows communities a role in reuse decisions for their property and provides redevelopment assistance. BRAC is an imperfect process, as we all know, and there are upfront costs for BRAC. The Future Year Defense Program adds $2.4 billion to pay for these costs. But in the long term, there are significant savings for BRAC. The previous 5 rounds of BRAC are saving $12 billion annually, and those savings will continue. In this budget, the Department has also achieved $8.2 billion in savings from weapons program terminations and restructuring. For example, by revising the acquisition strategy for the Army's Ground Combat Vehicle, the GCV program, the Department will save over $2 billion in development costs. In other cases, the Department used evolutionary approaches to develop new capabilities instead of relying on leap-ahead gains in technology. The cost of military pay and benefits are another significant driver of spending growth that must be addressed in the current fiscal environment. In this budget, the Department is submitting a new package of military compensation proposals that take into consideration congressional concerns associated with those from FY 2013. These changes save about $1.4 billion in FY 2014 and a total of $12.8 billion in FY 2014 through 2018. This package includes a modest slowing of the growth of military pay by implementing a 1% pay raise for service members in 2014. The Department is also seeking additional changes to the TRICARE program in the FY 2014 budget to bring the beneficiaries' cost share closer to the levels envisioned when the program was implemented, particularly for working-age retirees. Survivors of military members who died in office and on active duty, or medically retired members who would be excluded from all TRICARE increases. Even after the proposed changes in fees, TRICARE still remains a very substantial benefit. These adjustments to pay and benefits were among the most carefully considered and difficult choices in the budget. They were made with the strong support of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the senior enlisted leadership, in recognition that in order to sustain these benefits over the long term without dramatically reducing the size or readiness of the force, these rising costs need to be brought under control. The longer we wait, the more difficult it will be. Nevertheless, spending reductions on the scale of the current drawdown cannot be implemented through improving efficiency and reducing overhead alone. Cuts and changes to capabilities, force structure, and modernization programs will also be required. The strategic guidance issued in January 2012 set the priorities and parameters that inform those choices, and the FY 2014 budget submission further implements and deepens program alignment to this strategic guidance. The new strategy calls for a smaller and leaner force, a more agile force. Last year, we proposed reductions of about 100,000 in military in-strength between 2012 and FY 2017. Most of those reductions occur in the ground forces and are consistent with the decision not to size U.S. ground forces to accomplish prolonged stability operations, while maintaining adequate capability should such activities again be required. By the end of FY 2014, we will have completed almost two-thirds of the drawdown of our ground forces, and the drawdown should be fully complete by FY 2017. Increased emphasis on the Asia-Pacific and Middle East represents another key tenet of the new defense strategic guidance. This budget continues to put a premium on rapidly deployable, self-sustaining forces, such as submarines, long-range bombers, and carrier strike groups that can project power over great distance and carry out a variety of missions. This new strategy leverages new concepts of operation enabled by advances in space, cyberspace, special operations, global mobility, precision strike, missile defense, and other capabilities. By making difficult trade-offs in lower priority rates and areas, the FY 2014 budget protects or increases key investments in the critical areas of critical capabilities. Another critical area of focus in this budget request is sustaining the readiness and quality of the all-volunteer service. The high quality of our all-volunteer force continues to be the foundation of our military strength, and the FY 2014 budget request includes $137.1 billion for military personnel, as well as $49.4 billion for military medical care. Together, these make up roughly one-third of our base budget. This budget seeks to ensure that our troops receive the training and the equipment they need for military readiness and the world-class support programs they and their families have earned. The Department continues to support key programs in FY 2014 that support service members and their families, spending $8.5 billion on initiatives that include transition assistance and veterans employment assurance, behavioral health, family readiness, suicide prevention, and sexual assault prevention and response. The FY 2014 budget is a reflection of DoD's best efforts to match ends, ways, and means during a period of intense fiscal uncertainty. It is obvious that significant changes to the Department's top-line spending would require changes to this budget plan. The Department must plan for any and all additional reductions to the defense budget that might result from the Congress and the administration agreeing on a deficit reduction plan. It must be prepared in the event that sequester-level cuts persist for another year or over the long term. Consequently, I directed a strategic choices and management review. I asked for that review in order to assess the potential impact of further reductions up to the level of full sequester. The purpose of this review is to reassess the basic assumptions that drive the Department's investment and force structure decisions. The review will identify the strategic choices and further institutional reforms that still may be required, including those reforms which should be pursued regardless of fiscal pressure. It is designed to help understand the challenges, articulate the risks, and look for opportunities for reform and efficiencies presented by resource constraints. Everything will be on the table. Everything will be on the table during this review. Roles and missions, planning, business practices, force structure, personnel and compensation, acquisition and modernization investments, how we operate, and how we measure and maintain readiness. This review is being conducted by Deputy Secretary Carter, working with General Dempsey. The service secretaries and service chiefs, Office of the Secretary of Defense principals, and combatant commanders all serve as essential participants. Our aim is to conclude this review, which is now underway and has been underway, by May 31st of this year. The results will inform our 2015 budget request and will be the foundation for the quadrennial defense review due to Congress in February of next year. It is already clear to me that achieving significant additional budget savings without unacceptable risk to national security will require not just tweaking or chipping away at existing structures and practices, but if necessary, fashioning entirely new ones that better reflect 21st century realities. That will require the partnership of Congress. The FY 2014 budget and the ones before it have made hard choices. In many cases, modest reforms to personnel and benefits, along with efforts to reduce infrastructure and restructure acquisition programs, met fierce political resistance and were not implemented. We are now in a different fiscal environment, dealing with new realities that will force us to more fully confront these tough and painful choices, and to make the reforms we need to make to put this department on a path to sustain our military strength for the 21st century. But in order to do that, we will need flexibility, we will need time, and we will need some budget certainty. We will also need to fund the military capabilities that are necessary for the complex security threats of the 21st century. I believe the President's budget does that. With the partnership of Congress, the Defense Department can continue to find new ways to operate more affordably, efficiently, and effectively. However, multiple reviews and analysis show that additional major cuts, especially those on the scale and timeline of sequestration, would require dramatic reductions in core military capabilities or the scope of our activities around the world. As the executive and legislative branches of government, we have a shared responsibility to ensure that we protect national security and America's strategic interests. Doing so requires that we make every decision on the basis of enduring national interests and make sure every policy is worthy of the service and sacrifice of our service members and their families. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for a very thorough statement and the challenges that your department faces and the challenges that we face. It's an excellent review of where we are and where we have to go. So thank you for being very, very thorough. General, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to interrupt at this point for the chairman of the Appropriations Committee to make his statement. You recall I mentioned that he was doing a speech on the floor when he normally would have done this. Mr. Rogers, Mr. Chairman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. Mr. Secretary, congratulations on your confirmation to this very important post, and welcome back to General Dempsey and Secretary Hale to this subcommittee. We want to thank you for being with us today to share your thoughts on the 14 budget request. In other subcommittee hearings, I've already lamented the fact that this budget request is woefully late and in its totality full of gimmicks, tax increases generally unhelpful, but we will persevere. Let me begin by taking an opportunity to thank the members of the military for their service, their sacrifice in uniform that you are representing here today. As this subcommittee has done in the past, we want to reaffirm our commitment to providing our warfighters with the tools, the training, the equipment, and the support necessary to carry out vital security missions throughout the world. Appreciation for the members of the military and their service can't be overstated. With continued instability in the Middle East and Northern Africa, to the evolving challenges in the Asia-Pacific region, especially North Korea, There's no question that those who serve under our flag these days are doing so during a very critical period in our history. World events often remind us that our country, our freedom, our way of life remain at constant risk, and we must take measured steps to protect the values that we hold. In this volatile world, increasingly, we are facing enemies both foreign and domestic. We're now confronted with a very serious fiscal problem at home, as you have described, Mr. Secretary, from skyrocketing entitlement programs, trillion-dollar deficits, to a fledgling economy and declining military-industrial base. We can now add to that the devastating effects of sequestration to our servicemen and women. As I've said before, sequestration is the wrong approach to reining in spending, particularly as our nation's military readiness will foolishly suffer. However, we are under sequestration, and I hope you can clarify for me some of its impacts. We've recently heard that the Army has canceled 7 combat training center rotations. The Navy's canceled ship deployments. Air Force has stood down 12 combat-coded squadrons, not to mention potential civilian furloughs for up to 14 days, all due to sequestration. I hope you can translate for us, translate that into the real world for us, including what that means in terms of readiness and force posture. We'll continue to wrestle with these issues with you. I'm very happy and pleased to see during the fiscal 13 CR that we were able to include the full year defense and veterans, MILCON and veterans bills, giving you some much needed flexibility in funding for DOD. In the past 3 years, we've worked across the aisle, across the Capitol, demonstrating the commitment of members and staff alike to restore regular order. And it's my goal to continue that process in fiscal 14 with an eye on looking out for our men and women holding the line on our security. We have some very tough choices ahead for us and you, and I appreciate your commitment to doing what we have to do to control the spending, but also to maintain that readiness. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. General, we're really happy to have you back again. It is always good testimony that comes from your shop. We appreciate the challenge that you have as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you have a team that is outstanding that work with you. So at this point, we're very happy to receive your testimony, sir.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member Visklaski, Chairman and Ranking Member from the full committee, and I'm honored to do it, Congressman. As you well know, we go back a long way, and there are some incredibly complex issues facing us, but it's a time, I think, to exert a little leadership, and I'm happy to do it and proud to do it with the members of this committee and the remainder of the Congress. I'd like to add my thoughts and prayers to those who suffered from the act of terror in Boston. Also add my compliments to the Massachusetts National Guard, who, as the Secretary said, were among the first responders, and who continue to flow as necessary to assist local law enforcement. And finally, to assure everyone that we've been in contact both with state and governmental officials and stand ready to support in any way. I do welcome this opportunity to update you on the state of the armed forces and also to discuss with you the fiscal year 2014 budget submission. This hearing comes at a time of extraordinary uncertainty. As resources decline, the risks to our national security go up. It's in this context that I offer my perspective on how we can work together to sustain a balanced and peerless force. One thing is certain, I think you know this, our men and women in uniform are steadfast in their courage and in their devotion to duty. I could see it in their eyes of those that I had the honor of meeting just recently in Afghanistan, but also of re-enlisting into the further service of their country at Bagram Airfield. In Afghanistan, our forces are simultaneously fighting, transitioning, and redeploying. And the Afghan military will soon take operational lead for security across the country. As they gain confidence, so too do the people of Afghanistan gain confidence. The coalition will remain in support as we transition to a sustainable presence in the post-14 environment. At every point along the way, our responsibility is to make sure that the mission matches the levels of force that remain there to do the mission, and we'll do that. Our joint force has been vigilant elsewhere as well. We're deterring aggression in Northeast Asia and assuring our allies in the face of provocation by North Korea, and in Southeast Asia by Iran. In the Middle East by Iran. We're also working with our interagency partners to protect the nation against cyber attack, and we're acting directly and with partners to defeat al-Qaeda. We're rebalancing to the Asia-Pacific and adapting our force posture to a new normal of combustible violence in North Africa and in the Middle East. And we're also working with others to keep Syria's very complex conflict from destabilizing the entire region. We're prepared with options should military force be called upon, and assuming it can be used effectively to secure our interests without making matters worse. We must also be ready for options for an uncertain and dangerous future. That is, a future we have not yet identified. Now, this budget was purpose-built to keep the nation immune from coercion. It aims to restore our versatility to a more affordable joint force in support of our defense strategy. But let me be clear about what this budget does not do. This budget does not reflect the full sequestration amount. It does impose less reduction and give us more time. However, uncertainty persists about what the top line will be in this or any future budget. Nor does this budget include funds to restore lost readiness. We don't yet know what the full impact of this year's challenge has had on our readiness. We're accumulating the information necessary to answer that question. But what we don't know is that readiness shortfall imposed this year is not accounted for in the 14 budget, and that's concerning. As expected, we have already curtailed, as you said, or canceled training for many units across the services, that is, those who are not preparing to deploy. And we all know, or we should all know, that it's more expensive to restore readiness than it is to maintain it. Recovery costs, therefore, will compete with our ability to build the joint force in the out years. This budget does, however, invest in our priorities, as the Secretary said. It does keep the force in balance. It supports our forward deployed operations. It upholds funding for emerging capabilities, such as cyber. It funds those conventional and nuclear capabilities that have proven so effective and essential in keeping our nation safe and our defense secure. It also lowers manpower costs. It reduces excess infrastructure, and it makes healthcare more sustainable. Most importantly, it invests in our true decisive advantage, which is our people. It treats being the best led, the best trained, and the best equipped military as the non-negotiable imperative. Never has our nation sustained such a lengthy war solely through the service of an all-volunteer force. We must honor our commitments to them and to their families. For many veterans, returning home is actually a new front line in the struggle with wounds sometimes seen and often unseen. We have to continue to invest in world-class treatment for mental health issues, traumatic brain injury, and for combat stress. And we also have a shared responsibility to address the urgent issue of suicide within the ranks and address it with the same devotion we have shown to protecting their lives in combat. The risks inherent to military service must never include the risk of sexual assault. Sexual assault betrays the trust on which our profession is founded, and we'll pursue every option to drive this crime from our ranks. In many ways, this is a defining moment for our military. Our warriors' will to win is undaunted, but the means to prepare to win are becoming somewhat uncertain. We have an opportunity, actually, I would suggest an obligation, with this and any future budget to restore confidence. We have it within us to stay strong as a global leader and as a reliable partner. The joint force is looking to us to lead them through this period of historic fiscal correction. But we can't do it alone. As we've all said, we need budget certainty, we need time, and we need flexibility. And that means a predictable funding stream. It means the time to deliberately evaluate the trade-offs in force structure, modernization, compensation, and readiness. And it means the full flexibility to keep the force in balance. Thank you for all you've done and continue to do to support our men and women in uniform. I only ask that you continue to support a responsible investment in the nation's defense. And I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. You anticipated a number of our questions in your statement, so we appreciate that. Well, we have an excellent attendance today, so I'm going to move quickly and watch the time limits pretty closely, but I'm going to take just a couple of minutes. And I appreciate the comments that both of you made relative to the National Guard and the response in Boston yesterday. But I want to call attention to the fact that the National Guard team was the 24th Civil Support Team, which has been scheduled to be disestablished. And the Congress questions that. Congress, in the National Defense Act last year, Congress authorized the two civil support teams that are scheduled to be disestablished. And this committee funded those teams, but you still intend to disestablish them. But I did want to call attention to the fact that one of those teams that you want to disestablish was the one that responded yesterday to the Boston Marathon bombings. The other one is the only maritime civil support team that we have in the United States. It's the 48th, which is located near MacDill Air Force Base, which is the home of Central Command and the home of Special Operations Command. And so I would speak for the committee and for the Congress. We question the disestablishment of these civil support teams that you have talked about today without mentioning who they were. So I just thought I'd get that. If you want to respond to that, that would be fine. It's up to you, either one. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Chairman Rogers, nice to see you. Thank you. If you're referring to the two teams in New York and Florida,
yes, sir.
There is money in the budget for those, and
yes.
I think we've sent that up to the Hill. So we have funded both the New York and the Florida.
Yes, yes, sir. I understand that. But on the 29th of March, a letter from your department notified the defense committees of your intent to disestablish those two CSTs. So I thought I would just remind you that these are important teams. And Congress is very, very supportive of those teams.
They are important, and we have put the funding in both those, and I think Congress was informed of that the last few days, and we put the money back in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Visklowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, just two issues, because we will be short on time. On the issue of the department preparing auditable financial statements, do have a number of questions for the record, but understand that they include achieving audit readiness for the statements of budgetary resources for fiscal year 2014 and meeting legal requirements for full audit readiness by 2017. Do you think this is a very important initiative? I must tell you, always get concerned, whether it's DOD or any other department, where goals are pushed out 4 or 5 years. A year from now, we're talking about it being 2018 or 2019. And just want to emphasize that I do attach a lot of importance to the initiative.
I strongly support that effort, and as you know, my predecessor, Congressman Panetta, when he was in this job, was very supportive of the effort. We intend to make those deadlines, and we will do everything we can to fulfill that commitment.
Appreciate it very much. The other question I have is on the integration of electronic health records. In the fiscal year 2008 National Defense Authorization Act, there is a direction to the Department of Defense as well as the Veterans Administration to develop a single electronic health record system that would follow a service member from the time he or she enlisted till the time they exited into VA care. The original goal was 2009. Coincidentally, the new completion date has slipped to 2017. My understanding is that the issue of whether there be one core system or two systems that would integrate information between the departments is one of the issues, and apparently there's a decision pending at DOD within your office on this. The Veterans Administration believes that DOD should use an existing system that is proprietary to the United States government at this point. And just wondering, and again, I have questions for the record, what's your impression as far as the integration of these systems, and where are we today, if I could ask?
Thank you. First, the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs continue to work very closely. I think in the first on this issue, the first week I was in office, I went over to the VA and spent an hour and a half with Secretary Shinseki on this issue and other issues that connect to the integrated electronic health system. Interoperability is the real key, assuring that there are electronic transfer highways. We produce the veteran, DOD, and there should be a seamless process that allows a veteran to have assurance and reliability in that his or her records are moved to the VA, whether it's a claims adjustment issue or claims filing issue, whatever. That is still our goal. We continue to work with the VA. We had a meeting yesterday on the efforts. We have a team in place that the VA requested from DOD there on this. There have been programs and progress made. We're not where we should be. We're not where we committed to be, but we will get there. But I think the key is the interoperability of our systems. And as you noted, the VA has selected VISTA as its system. We are behind in that process, DOD. And I, over the last few weeks, have gotten into this issue myself. And we're going to do some restructuring within DOD so that we have more clear lines of authority, accountability, who's in charge, how is it going to get done. I'm not an expert on this issue, but when I was at the VA as Deputy Administrator in the Reagan administration in 1981 and 82, I had something to do with actually implementing the first electronic health systems. I'm quickly out of my depth, I recognize on this, but I have some knowledge of it and some experience, and I know it's difficult. I know the VA is faced with a tremendous amount of backload issues, and so we are working with them in every way. We're making progress, not where we need to be, but we'll continue to put it as a top priority.
Appreciate your
Would
candor.
the gentleman yield? Would the gentleman
Oh,
yield?
yes, sure.
I just wanted to associate myself with the ranking member's questions and concerns, and we'll
Good.
put the information in the record. I thank you.
Okay. Secretary, appreciate your candor and do encourage you in that. You referenced the backlog at VA. My sense is anything we can collectively do across agency lines to improve that would be welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Secretary, let me ask you about China and related topics. Last few months ago, I was in the Philippines, and President Aquino was very concerned about the Chinese claims on the South China Sea, that they were, in his judgment, violating international laws and norms in controlling that very vital shipping lane for the world's commerce. What can you tell us about the South China Sea and China's apparent efforts to control it to everyone else's exclusion?
Well, I am well aware of the issue with the island dispute. As you know, China has an island dispute not only with the Filipinos, but with Vietnam as well, and other nations, and Japan. And that's one of the reasons that 2 years ago the President made a decision in his defense strategic guidance is to rebalance our priorities to Asia and the Pacific. We have been a Pacific power. We will continue to be a Pacific power. We need to be a Pacific power, if for no other reason than the issue you identified, the sea lanes. We still are the most significant Navy in the Pacific. We will continue to be. We need to be. Much of the budget focus that we put on, as the Chairman noticed, into prioritizing our resources is to assure that rebalancing is not eroded. We have allies there. We have relationships there. It's clearly in our interest that those sea lanes remain open, and we'll continue to protect, along with our allies, those sea lanes.
Well, 80%, I'm told, of the world commerce travels through the straits and the South China Sea. And if China decides to control that shipping lane, it would have tremendous impact all around the world. But with countries like Japan and all the others in that region, it would be devastating. Are we prepared to keep those lanes open?
We are prepared. You're specifically referring to the Straits of Malacca, which, in fact, I was just there in August, and you identify it correctly. We, I think, in response to anticipated threats and challenges, as you know, have made new arrangements in Singapore with a rotation of our littoral ships in and out of that area. We have moved, as a result of shifting marine capacity off of Okinawa to Guam, but more importantly to northern Australia. We're working very closely with our allies in this area, and obviously much is predicated on assuring those sea lanes remain open.
And let me close, Mr. Chairman, by asking briefly about cybersecurity. Most people have concluded that that many of the attacks on our systems in this country are coming from China and are state-sponsored. But this is the new warfare of the future, and do you feel we are prepared to defend ourselves from these attacks? And what can you tell us about our preparedness?
Well, cyber is one of the areas in this budget where we have proposed increases, considerable increases, more people, more capacity. You also know that we have an interagency dimension to this. The Department of Homeland Security has most of the domestic authority. We, too, have authority to protect our interests. NSA, Cyber Command are the two main areas of expertise and responsibility. You have, I think, correctly identified the greatest threat to our security, economic security, political security, diplomatic security, military security that confronts us, not to minimize other threats. We are prepared and are preparing and strengthening that capacity to deal with these issues. We do know that these attacks are coming from 2 or 3 countries. We are dealing with China, talking to China about this. The chairman is going to be in China, which he will, I'm sure, respond to this or any other area that you want to talk about. specifically, though, on cyber, and when he is there in China, we'll address this issue. It is a serious issue, and we are talking to the Chinese about it. But overall, the cyber threat is a very real threat to this country.
It is, and it's going to get worse. And I think we have to take action with China to stop the PLA from bombarding us hourly with these hack attacks. They've stolen all sorts of weaponry from us and research, even the F-35. And I would hope that the department would be much more aggressive on the cybersecurity front. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lowy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, Secretary Hagel, General Dempsey, Secretary Hale, for your comments. First of all, Secretary Hagel, I do hope you will follow up on your statement regarding support for the 2 National Guard teams. It is my understanding that DOD sent a March 29th letter to Congress notifying they are moving forward with de-establishing one of the 2 Florida and New York National Guard civil support teams. So I'm hoping your statement for the record will keep those teams on duty as we all express our heartfelt sympathy for those who were impacted by the tragedy in Boston. We know the National Guard teams were there before, and they stayed, and they were invaluable. So does your statement that you will keep them stand for the record?
It does stand for the record, yes. Thank you.
I thank you so much. And I would also like to follow up on our distinguished ranking member's questions regarding the veterans' claim backlog. We all, and General Dempsey, you said the men and women in uniform, steadfast devotion to our country. And all of us have such respect. I've been to Bargham, I've been to other bases for the work they do. But frankly, we have been neglecting them. And I think it's important to state for the record that since 2008, the Department of Defense and veterans have spent more than $1 billion to create an integrated electronic health record. And frankly, they have little to show for it. I've seen pictures. I was going to bring it, and I decided not to, of the boxes at the Department of Defense boxes. And this is, I can't believe that it is still in boxes of records that haven't been dealt with. As we know, the departments use separate medical databases that can neither translate nor communicate the data to one another in a fundamental way. There are currently up to 600,000 veterans who have served our country with such distinction, waiting 125 days or more to have their medical claims processed. Shame on us. The VA annual claims receipts are expected to reach 1.2 million in 2013, an increase of almost 60% since 2005. I cannot adequately express to you how outraged I am with this situation. I have talked to many people trying to get the facts, and frankly, Mr. Secretary, I do hope you're going to focus like a laser, as well as General Dempsey, on this issue, because although Secretary Shinseki takes most of the blame, it is the opinion of most who've been involved in this issue that it is the problem with the Department of Defense. Although the VA may have the primary responsibility, DOD has contributed to the problem by not adopting, as you heard, the VA's electronic system, VISTA. Now, I'm not an expert, as you said, on the system, but if the VA is using the VISTA system, it is reasonable to assume that DOD should either use that system or another that works seamlessly with VISTA. Now, you said you want to fix it. Everyone wants to fix this. $1 billion already spent, and the Secretary of Defense and General Dempsey, all of us want to fix it. Is VISTA at least being considered? If you pursue a different system, what guarantees do you have that it will work after 5 years of failure? And how long it would take to implement the system? When can we expect an announcement? It's hard to believe that our military, our distinguished military that serves us all over the world, can't fix this system so that our veterans can be taken care of. And I know you're new at this. Maybe General Dempsey should respond. I just don't get it. I just don't understand, and it breaks my heart. And I have to tell you, the number of cases that come into my congressional office, and they're handled so expeditiously, but only because I have a person who won't give up and tracks it down. He almost has to go there and look through the boxes to find these records. 5 years, $1 billion, you're going to do it now?
Congresswoman, I don't disagree with anything you said. I would love to hand this over to Chairman Dempsey, but that wouldn't be fair. Let me respond this way. Every issue you have brought up and every statement you've made is generally accurate in every way. I mean, there's some issues about dollars, but I can't sit here and defend what we've done. I mean, I could take you down through the programs and say, well, it hasn't been totally wasted because these things have come out of the investment. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to acknowledge that we're way behind. We will do better. I have just said that a few minutes ago that I have personally taken this on. I will have someone in my office, Secretary of Defense's office, that I'm designated to put this together. I'm restructuring who's in charge and the accountability of this. I deferred a request for proposal. I stopped it from going out the end of March because I didn't think we knew what the hell we were doing. And until I get some understanding of this, get some control of it, we're not going to spend any more money on it. Now, that doesn't mean we aren't making progress. We are making progress. We've got teams at the VA. We are doing a lot of good things. There are a lot of good things are happening. We have not completed an integrated health record system, which we committed to, except the one thing. What the president said he wanted when he came into office, what I think we all wanted, what the Congress instructed, what the Congress funded, was a seamless, interoperable system. Now, you can use integrated, use any word you want. I want it to work. And until I get my arms around this, I'm not going to spend any more money on this. We will have it shortly. Can I tell you in a week or two? We will have something decided within 30 days. I'll tell you that. I can't defend it, and we are making some progress. A lot of good things been done. We're way behind. We will do better. Have to do better.
Thank you very much, Secretary Hagel. And in closing, I just want to highlight a related issue. Among post-9/11 veterans nationwide, the unemployment rate, as you know, remains higher than the national average. It is estimated there are currently 800,000 unemployed veterans nationwide, as well as 60,000 homeless veterans. And with all the challenges our veterans face, I was pleased that President Obama's budget request included a proposal for a new transition assistance program that would help our veterans adjust to civilian life. I won't ask you now because I know there are many people who have questions, but I would hope that you could share with us the key components of the new transition assistance program, and if you could describe how educational opportunities will be incorporated, what changes will be made to strengthen job search skills and job placement. My time may be up, so if you can just, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like Secretary Hagel just to share that. It's a concern for so many of us in our communities.
If I may, I'll make a very brief response, Mr. Chairman, if it's appropriate, and then I will provide details for the record for all the members. And this is what I would say. When I came to this job, and I said very clearly, I had priorities like anyone who is taking on a new job. Certainly, my first priority is the defense of this country. and that's what the President of the Congress of People of this country has charged me with, leading that institution with only one responsibility. Within that responsibility are the people who serve this country, and not just while they're serving the country in uniform, but afterward. We make that commitment. And there is no higher priority to me as Secretary of Defense than getting this right. We will get it right. I will provide you, for the record, all the details of the new program, the new funding. Thank you.
Will the
Thank-
gentlelady yield just for 2 seconds to ask in furtherance of her question at the beginning regarding the e-records between the VA and DOD, if the department could provide to the record the expenditures through the accounting office of who's gotten the funds since this effort began? That would be most interesting to look at, the amounts, the year, the firm, et cetera. I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Secretary Hagel. And as you well know, under the sequester, the 2,000 veterans that you hire each week, as I understand, will be threatened. So if we can deal with every part of that issue, we're all very concerned. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Frelinghuysen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for your service and for the men and women that you support each and every day. I want to follow up on Chairman Rogers' question, not only relating to China, the desire of China to have a blue navy. They're working unabated to, have a lot more submarines, a lot more surface aircraft, space architecture. The issue of red lines here. I mean, the Philippines are good allies. The Japanese have been allies of ours for generations. The Vietnamese are growing closer to us. It's interesting that our enemy at one point would be now potentially a good friend. There seem to be a lot of red lines drawn here, and I'd like to get your reaction. Is there a red line here? As there is, has been pointed out, we have a red line in terms of what's happening in terms of Iran developing nuclear weapon capacity. We drew a red line relative to acting if Syria should perhaps move and use chemical weapons. Some of the rhetoric suggests, too, that the administration's drawn a red line relative to activities coming out of North Korea that are indeed threatening not only South Korea, but we're now setting up missile defense where before perhaps people felt we didn't need that type of missile defense. Tell us about these red lines here, because I think to some extent our credibility is on the line here. Would you talk about this issue of red lines here and how prepared are we to act? Because obviously people are looking to see whether we are capable of acting.
Thank you, Congressman. If I might, let me begin with your first point about picking up on Chairman Rogers' question on China and South China Sea, Pacific sea lanes. Then I'll respond to your other components, South Korea, Iran. First, international rights of the sea, nations. Every nation agrees that the freedom of navigation on the high seas is a pretty basic component of a nation state. How you protect that then becomes the issue. That's why our allies, our treaty obligations, our relationships are, I've always believed, and are going to be even more so, critically important to these kinds of issues, which are clearly not only in America's interest, but because we have a global economy that is indeed global. Freedom of the seas is indispensable for that global economy, for our interest, our allies' interest. When I noted in one of my responses about shifting assets and rebalancing what we're doing in the Pacific, I mentioned specifically the literal ship visits in Singapore, using that port more, putting Marines in northern Australia, moving Marines to Guam, so on. That's all part of the tactical components to fulfill the strategic interests of certainly our country and our allies' interests in the Pacific, and keeping those sea lanes open and keeping a very strong forward presence and projecting power in those areas. That's real. As to red lines in Iran regarding the North Koreans, I would say this, that the President of the United States has made very clear what his red lines are in each of these specific areas. Your question to me as Secretary of Defense, and the Chairman may want to add something to this, is are we prepared to back up whatever decision the President may have to make in fulfilling the President's commitment for our national security interests as well as our allies.
Your Israeli counterpart was reported in the Jerusalem Post in an interview, asked if the Israeli Defense Forces had the capabilities to attack alone in Iran. Benny Gantz said unequivocally yes. Are we prepared to support their effort? Is that another red line? Or is that we have a joint responsibility to come to the Israelis' aid if they take some sort of unilateral action?
Well, that's a policy issue that the President would have to decide. My role, the Department of Defense, is to be able to support whatever policy decisions the President makes. The relationship with Israel and our military relationship is as close as it's ever been, whether it's missile defense, Iron Dome, or rocket defense, the different weapon systems that we are assisting them with, our military-to-military relationships. I'm going to be in Israel in a few days. Our interests are very clear and common, and so I would answer your question that way, and I think the Israelis know that, and we know that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a lot of red lines out here, and I'm just saying this is, when we issue these red lines, there's the judgment call is that if there's a problem, we're going to act, and obviously we have to do that, diplomacy first, but in reality we need to have the military capability to sustain some sort of operation if we start it.
We have the military capability, and we have the ability to provide the President what's required to protect the interests of this country and our allies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Granger.
Thank you. I have two questions, and the first one is to General Dempsey, and we're talking about relationships. Would you bring us up to date on the state of our relationship, military to military, with Egypt, and how important is this relationship to our national security, and is the military in Egypt a reliable and an independent actor given the turmoil that's going on everywhere else?
Egypt is, whenever I speak with any of my counterparts throughout that region, they will always remind me that Egypt is one of the cornerstones has to be one of the cornerstones of stability in that region. You know, when you think about that region, there's only really two nations that have been nation states almost in perpetuity. One is Turkey, the other is Egypt. And so I do believe that our relationship with Egypt, as challenging as sometimes it can be, is in fact has to be one of the cornerstones of our strategy in that region of the world. Now, as far as the Egyptian military, we have a very strong relationship with the Egyptian military. I've been in contact with my counterpart several times. They have acted responsibly to try to stay out of the politics but be a stabilizing influence, and I think successfully. They're concerned about the future of their country. You know, they see some of the political trends, and they're concerned about them as we are, and I think that bears monitoring. But I do think that our investment in a Egyptian armed forces that is a stabilizing influence both in the region and internally at this point is a good investment.
Good, thank you. I have the second question is to Mr. Secretary and General Dempsey both, and it has to do with the deployment. The Defense Department canceled the deployment of the second aircraft carrier to the Persian Gulf, and I certainly understand that you're making changes due to sequestration and the budget cuts. However, I am concerned about that decision because of the very serious dangers related to Iran's nuclear activity. So can you tell me the strategic rationale in canceling the second carrier and how we prepared to address those threats that Iran could cause?
Congresswoman, we rely on the advice of our combatant commanders in each of these areas. In this case, it's Central Command. And under his watch, and it was with his advice, the questions were asked, what assets do you require, would you need for different contingencies? Obviously, the carrier issue was a big one, and we had to think through that. We have 10 carriers now, as you know, and all 10 are not operational at one time, and you know the sequencing of this. So we've had to make some tough choices on protecting our readiness and our interests around the world. And so we have to rely on our combatant commanders for their best advice. Is this something that you can honestly tell us that we're still okay? We can still do what we would possibly need to do to respond to any Iranian provocation or any provocation. So that essentially was the reason that we made the decision, and whose advice we took. It goes through a process that, and I'll let General Dempsey respond as well on this, where the combatant commander comes up through the chairman's office, and within his office he looks at it, makes some pretty hard choices and decisions, and then it's brought to Secretary of Defense. But Marty, you may want to say something.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary and Congresswoman. We saved $387 million by not deploying and by leaving that carrier in what we call surge capacity. So it would be available should it be needed to some unexpected contingency, but by not deploying it, we saved $387 million, which the Navy was then able to use to keep flying hours for some of their wings and ISR platforms trained to the extent they need to be trained. We're looking for $23 billion in readiness funding this year, and we've got to find it wherever we can find it. And we're trying not to mortgage 14 by doing everything in other words, we got to balance what we're doing in 13 with the longer-term effect on readiness in 14, and that's why this decision was made. We have other ways of compensating with land-based aircraft and other things in the region, so we did not change the calculus of our ability to be postured, to deter, and to be ready for Iranian contingencies. But this was a very tough decision, not just because of the strategic messaging that you just mentioned, but also we affected 6,000 or 7,000 sailors and their families, some of whom, we did this with about a week before they were to deploy. Many of those families the family members had decided to go home to their parents, so they terminated their rental contracts. They put their cars in storage. They suspended education courses. This had an enormous effect on human effect, and we didn't take the decision lightly. Although in some circles it was portrayed as a statement of some kind. I can assure you, we don't make statements on the back of our men and women in uniform.
I know that I speak for this whole subcommittee in saying that sequestration was terrible legislation. And I certainly hope, you've mentioned several times, if this continues, that we can come up with something else besides that. But the more you tell us about what this is costing, the more help we get. None of us, we kept hearing, Secretary Pradette I talked to personally several times, who said, I'm not going to put a list together because it should never happen, so I'm not going to waste my people's time putting a plan together, something I don't think should happen, and it happened. So the more information you can give us, the more we can talk to people outside of this subcommittee, and so they understand this enormous burden we put and danger. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Moran.
First of all, Mr. Secretary, your life of military and civilian service has defined courage and integrity, and I want to thank you for your willingness to serve as our nation's Secretary of Defense. And that gauntlet of politically inspired, mean-spirited invective that some of your former Senate colleagues put you through during the confirmation hearings was a disgrace. But here you are in a position of greater responsibility and consequence than they're ever likely to be entrusted with. Now, don't say anything. I just wanted to get that off my chest. Now, Mr. Secretary, the most violent military conflict we have in the world today is in Syria. More than 70,000 civilians killed, primarily by Syrian government forces, but they're armed primarily by the Russian government. And there's something that troubles me. I don't think we can really change the policy that we have adopted under the circumstances. We don't want to be arming people that might later on turn their arms towards us. But what troubles me is that we are in some ways subsidizing Russia's principal state-owned arms export. It's called Rosa-Born export. They were, because of so many violations in the past, we said we wouldn't deal with them several years ago. But here we are. We have bought 33 Mi-17 helicopters from them with U.S. taxpayer dollars. And we passed an amendment. In fact, it was my amendment, so I remember the numbers very clearly, 407 to 5. I mean, it's tough for us to get a vote honoring our mothers on Mother's Day with that kind of a vote. So it's a pretty clear expression of congressional intent. And yet, we were just told 2 weeks ago by the Pentagon that you intend to buy another 30 additional Mi-17 helicopters, ignoring the congressional intent that we put both in the authorization and the appropriation bill. You're saying you're going to use FY12 Afghan Security Forces funds, but it gets worse. That delivery is not going to be made until 2016 at the latest, 2 years after we have withdrawn. And we don't know what the situation's going to be in 2016 in Afghanistan. So, you know, with all the tens of billions of dollars we've put into Afghanistan, this is a tough one to justify. Can you address that?
I'm going to ask the chairman to respond as well. But in light of the very generous comment you made about me, I'm sorry that the first question has to be a negative one, but I appreciate
well,
your
we got to get back to business at some point. You understand it. I didn't want you to say anything.
It's a hell of a reminder to this.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a tough league, but
yeah. Thank you. I understand exactly what you're saying. Here's the reason the decision was made. I know you've heard this. There was a waiver, I understand, a national security waiver that could be signed certifying that the M-17 helicopter was clearly in the interest of the Afghans and our relationship and our commitments that we have made to assist them as we are leaving and will transition out. The M-17 is a very simple helicopter. They've been trained on it. They've been using it for years. It's a Russian helicopter, as you note. Easy maintenance, unsophisticated. We can get it pretty quickly. They want it. that's the one that they want. Now, for all those reasons and some others, the decision was made to go ahead with that decision to appropriate the money, fund the M17 purchase. Now, I know there are many who don't agree with that, but in trying to comply with the commitments that we've made to Afghanistan and what is easiest for them, what they wanted, what their maintenance requirements were, what their pilot requirements were, what their terrain requirements were, recognizing all the other facts, the decision was made on a pretty cold-blooded, calculated basis. Now, let me ask General Dempsey if he'd like to add anything to that.
No, just to reinforce, it was the right helicopter for them, Congressman. And by the way, I would point out that we are trying to accelerate we call them enabling capabilities or enablers, to provide them as much capability as possible so that they can, in fact, take responsibility for security. I'd also mention, you mentioned withdrawal, but there's no scenario where we wouldn't retain a core of advisors to train, advise, and assist them in the fielding, especially of capabilities as they came on board well beyond 14. Now, unless you're privy to some other plan that I'm not, we don't intend to completely withdraw from Afghanistan. And finally, it's easy to point out the friction points among nations, whether it's Russia or China, but there's also plenty of places where we have common interests, and Afghanistan happens to be one of those with Russia. Russia wants a stable Afghanistan post-14 just as we do because of the effect it could have on them. They're supporting us in the Northern Distribution Network. We collaborate on counter-terror issues and counter-narcotic issues. So there's plenty of places where we collaborate and agree with Russia. There are a handful where we have friction points.
Well, I know I'm out of time, but if I had time, Mr. Chairman, I would ask why, when 180,000 of your 800,000 DOD employees that are being furloughed are paid out of working capital funds, thus not achieving any appropriated savings, why we are doing that. But I'll let Mr. Hale think about that, and I don't want to monopolize the time, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. But thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two questions. One is an older question, one's a new question. And the first question is about this concept of strategic dispersal. I think Mr. Hale knows a little bit about that, General Dempsey, but I know you're new on the job. But when we talk about dispersing our nuclear aircraft carriers, that all happened in 2005 when we have an all-nuclear fleet now. And so that meant on the East Coast, we only had one home port for nuclear aircraft carriers. Had two or three, depending on how you count on the West Coast. And the Navy figured out that this is going to be a problem, and they did a study for 2.5 years, and they determined that dispersing our assets was a strategic imperative, and that we ought to have another home port on the East Coast, not only to disperse our assets, but also to have a backup nuclear maintenance facility. And then that was reviewed again in 2010 at the Quadrennial Defense Review. And so the department planned on a 5-year upgrade to have a second home port on the East Coast. And funds were requested in 2010, 2011, 2012, and they were approved. This subcommittee, I think, believes that's an important strategic imperative. But in 2013, there wasn't any money, zero money, to continue those upgrades, even though nothing had really changed. We saw a picture just a month or so ago about five nuclear carriers tied up together in Norfolk, which brings to mind some dramatic pictures of like Pearl Harbor, putting all your eggs in one basket. And I figured if a carrier's worth $7 billion, you got $35 billion worth of assets sitting there that potentially could be either impaired or destroyed, terrorism, accident, whatever. And so it just seems to me that to protect those kind of assets that are so important, that make a lot of sense to spend just a fraction of that value to have a second home port on the East Coast. I think it was Secretary Gates that said we've never considered a single home port on the West Coast acceptable, and we shouldn't accept that on the East Coast as well. And so I know that you're new to this issue. I don't know if you've been briefed on this strategic imperative, but I would like for you to comment on it. Do you agree with the results of that 2.5-year study, the Quadrennial Defense Review, and do you think we ought to make the investment to protect our assets, particularly our nuclear carriers on the East Coast?
I don't disagree with what you just noted and what the QDR found, but I think we are moving a carrier to Mayport. Is that right? We're not moving.
You would move a big deck amphib.
Okay, the amphibs are moving to Mayport. Okay. Well, what we need to, I think, always keep in mind, and what we try to do, and obviously Navy's assessment, is a balance of our assets and resources, just as you noted in your conversation with Secretary Panetta. Where will those resources and those assets be best home ported, and where they can respond in a balanced way in the quickest response time? I don't know the specifics of the decisions made by the Navy, but I do know that when we ask the questions and what they're dealing with every day, Navy's not the only service, but Air Force being another one, is that they've got to balance those assets to be able to respond to our commitments and our national interest. The amphibious ships that are going to Mayport, I think, are this year, or going this. Planning is, yeah, not sure physically if they'll be there this year, but the planning is to make sure that they're in place to get them there. I think certainly by next year.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you agree with that, because I think this subcommittee is very interested in making sure we protect those assets, and it doesn't cost a whole lot of money to finish those upgrades that were started. And so I think this subcommittee would certainly work with the department if we can make that happen, just not only to have that strategic dispersal, but also to have a backup nuclear maintenance facility on the East Coast, whereas on the West we have.
Well, those maintenance berths, I understand too, we're going to be able to fund most of them, not all of them. I think that was initially in the earlier budgets, but I think we're going to be able to fund.
Well, we're happy. We hope we could work with you. And let me ask a quick question about the space program. Excuse me for interrupting, because I know my time is short, but sometimes the space program, it's something everybody needs, but nobody really sees. It's one of those out of sight, out of mind. And I noticed there was $8 billion in the budget this year for our space programs. And so I wanted you to, if you wouldn't mind, to comment on the issues and the risks that we face in space, because if we don't have the availability of these systems, what kind of impact is going to have on our operations all around the world, particularly as we begin to emphasize the Asian Pacific area. Could you just talk about that?
Sure. Obviously, space is an absolute requirement. Our funding, our technology, our resources, for the reasons you just mentioned and others. And it will get more competitive. That's an area of technology we cannot allow to fall behind in. So much of everything revolves around that capacity that we have up there. And so it is a high priority, will continue to be a high priority in our technology, our research, and our funding.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hagel, General Dempsey, Under Secretary Hale. I was going to say good morning, but it's almost lunchtime, so thank you for being here. Collectively, the leadership of the Department of Defense, the President, every man and woman in uniform in this Congress is to ensure readiness and to have the capability to confront national security threats, large and small. And now this task must be done in a very difficult budget environment. So it's time for tough choices and smart cuts. And General Dempsey, in your testimony, you talked about reducing unneeded infrastructure, shedding ineffective acquisition programs, and I support this effort. And Congress must act responsibly to protect readiness and capability and not be protecting inefficiencies and waste. And Secretary Hagel, I applaud your strategic choices in management review. You know, this Congress needs to work with you in your efforts and not against these needed reforms. I have 3 questions, and I'm going to just put them all together for the sake of time for the chairman. Secretary Hagel, this is about the industrial military base. As the war in Afghanistan winds down and defense spending is reduced, you know, essential capacity in our military and industrial base must be preserved. As we learned when these conflicts started in the early 2000s, we weren't ready. We didn't have the equipment we needed for our men and women. So I'm hearing some real concern that the Pentagon is paying lip service to maintaining the industrial base capacity, that they're not seeing any tangible action for these companies to know that deliveries and requests are going to be made on time, and that they have, you know, the strategic planning to keep the base in place. Part of that is Congress's inability to pass budgets on time, and as the chairman wants to see us move towards regular order, we want to see that happen too. So there's a joint responsibility I do see in keeping the industrial base moving forward. But I'd like to have you present to this committee what we can expect in a plan, how the Pentagon is moving forward to protect this base. The other issue is something that I know as a senator you worked on a lot, and General Dempsey mentioned in his testimony, and that is in the area of development and diplomacy. To quote, you said, General Dempsey, as we set priorities and implement reductions, we need to pay attention to the important relationships among defense, development, and diplomacy. Fewer defense dollars mean we must rely more and invest more in our other instruments of power to help underwrite global security. So I thank you for your wise and thoughtful insight. And the Pentagon, as it looks forward with this, I would be interested in learning more about your perspective of how investments in development and diplomacy complement our national security strategy. But gentlemen, I didn't say this because it's the least important. It's because something that, quite frankly, I think we need to be working on very seriously. There's a disease that's infecting the U.S. military, and you both mentioned it in your statements. It's sexual assault of female members by their comrades. I would say by their brothers. The fact is, as many as 19,000 female service members were potentially assaulted in 2011. That, to me, sounds like an epidemic. An all-volunteer army, which is going to be increasingly dependent upon women, and women in the military face a 1 in 3 chance of being assaulted or raped. It's a very strong disincentive for young women to think about joining the military. And in fact, later this month, I will be honoring those people who have been accepted into our military service academies. To those women, quite often, I have given my personal number to them and said, do not hesitate to call me. You should never, never be a victim of sexual assault. But then I think of all the women in my district who have just gone down to a recruiter to serve their country who don't have my cell phone number. So Secretary Hagel, I am so proud of the way that you have asked Congress to look into what we can do to support you in this effort. I want to work with you on this. I have been very disappointed the entire time I have served here with the programs that the military has come up with. In my opinion, they have been short, they have been lip service. This is not only to protect our women who serve, but this is to protect each and every one of the men who put on a uniform, who are tainted with a brush every time one of these assaults occur. So Secretary Dempsey, what do I tell a young woman who's graduating from high school next month who wants to join the military? But quite frankly, she's afraid of being raped as a result of serving her country. And what do I tell the young Air Force recruit? And I'm going to quote a young Air Force recruit here, quote, "How am I supposed to go about reporting something when the person I'm supposed to report to is the person who raped me?" So, gentlemen, those are my 3 questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. I want to say that I really appreciate what you've just said to the Secretary and to the subcommittee. It's just a terribly, terribly important issue. Thank you for that. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank you both for coming here today. Thank you for your service. I talk a little bit about
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, Mr. Calvert, I realize we're out of time, so you will be responding in written testimony back to the chair, so I can expect an answer or reply when, sir?
And I apologize if I cut you off, Mr. Secretary. Please forgive me, but you certainly are recognized to respond.
Well, thank you, and I know there's a time issue here. Let me be very brief, and then I will, as General Dempsey, because one of the questions are actually all 3 were addressed to him as well, and we'll respond for the record. But just very briefly, the 3 issues you've mentioned, let's start with the last, sexual assault. That is an issue, as you have laid it out, and I can't expand on it, of highest priority. To me, General Dempsey, the leadership in the United States military. We've got a long way to go. We've got much more to do. You've noted some actions I've taken. I will be taking more. We need to do more. So let me end there. Be assured that this is something that I'm personally committed to, as well as the leadership of this institution. On the industrial base, the military industrial base is a absolutely key plank, foundational piece of our ability to sustain our technological edge, our edge in every way for the future. That cannot erode. We are working our way through that. What do we need? What we think may be excess capacity. We've got a study underway on this. It's a high priority. We have to do it. We need it. And we will do everything we can to address the issue and adjust to where we think the challenges are coming for the first part of the 21st century. I know the other issue that you wanted to talk about was something that you had asked General Dempsey. So if I might, I'll ask General Dempsey to respond to that issue, and then we'll get on with your question.
So in order, Congresswoman, the Defense Industrial Base is an issue about future readiness, and so we're attuned to that. And in the Strategic Choices Management Review, it will compete with the other factors of readiness, but I can assure you that we're focused on our ability not just to generate today's force, but tomorrow's force. On the issue of development and diplomacy, I am an advocate of recognizing that if we, as a nation, will ask the military to do less, then we can't leave a vacuum, and so something has to fill that vacuum. The less we do unilaterally, the more we have to do through partners, and that's both on the other agencies of government side, USAID, Department of State, other agencies of government that have an outreach to international partners. And in our case, it's literally security force assistance, building partner capacity, as I think we're doing pretty successfully in places like Yemen, like Somalia, like North and Western Africa. And then the last one on sexual assault. This is Sexual Assault Prevention Month. I'm very much, I've had 2 daughters serve. I hope you tell those young ladies who continue to be interested in service that they are entering an institution that is taking this more seriously than anyone else I know. I assure you it's not lip service, but I can't stand here today before you and tell you that we've turned the corner. We just haven't. And I had a meeting yesterday with the JCS. We meet monthly on the topic. It is as important to us as anything we're doing. And we look forward to partnering with Congress to helping each other figure it out. And in the process of doing so, by the way, we might actually help America figure this problem out, because it's a national problem.
Will the gentlelady yield just, Mr. Chairman, could I just add something? I would implore the chair, because of the importance of this issue, that perhaps working with the secretary, with Congresswoman McCollum, and with some of the interest groups and others who've been engaged and affected, that we find a way to better inform our membership. And perhaps there's a manner in which to do that. So I just throw that suggestion out there, and I thank the gentlelady and
Okay.
witnesses today.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Kapler. Okay. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Getting back to to this issue that I think it's important to address, and I know, Mr. Secretary, this has been of interest to you, and this is acquisition. And it's a mess in the Department of Defense from A to Z. And I don't know where to start, whether it's on the major acquisition programs. I remember General Casey sitting where you were at talking about a replacement vehicle for the Humvee, that if we're optimistic, it would take 7 years before we could get a replacement vehicle coming across the assembly line. We've had significant problems with the Joint Strike Fighter, with a tanker replacement for the Air Force. Certainly the Navy's had its issues with just a number of programs. We never seem to be able to estimate the cost of these programs accurately. Certainly not within the Department of Defense. I know the CAPE has been much more accurate in the past in developing accurate cost estimates for these programs. Certainly the time, and I can't imagine the cost. Billions and billions and billions of dollars have been wasted in the acquisition process for the United States Department of Defense over the last number of years. And in this budget era that we're in, the sequestration, I can't tell you whether it's going to, all of us didn't appreciate what we're having to go through, but I can't tell you, I don't think you know or anyone knows whether this is going to last for 1 year or 10 years. And so we're going to have to make some significant changes. That's issue one. And two, on civilian workforce issues within the Pentagon. As I understand it, as the forces are coming down, both Army, Navy, Marine Corps, the civilian workforce numbers are going down very little relative to that. And the reasons for that are numerous. I understand that. I understand you have a number of people, I think up to 50,000 are eligible for retirement in the Department of Defense, and the retirement programs for early retirement are not modernized to help encourage people to retire and to come out with a more efficient civilian workforce, bringing down those costs. But in this environment, we're going to have to start doing all that. You're a former business guy, I'm a former business guy. There's ways that we can bring down some costs without, I think, impacting readiness. And these are things that we need to seriously get involved in the coming months if we're going to get a hold of this issue. I appreciate your response, Mr. Secretary.
Congressman, thank you. I'll respond here very quickly to each of your points. And I'm going to ask the comptroller to specifically address the civilian workforce issue, because that workforce is coming down the projections as well for the reasons here that the comptroller will address. But acquisitions. The GAO recently released a report that was assessing our acquisition programs and processes, which is actually pretty favorable to the efforts and the work that is being done and has been done. We have a long way to go. We recognize that for the reasons that you noted. Something that the current Deputy Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, started when he was the Undersecretary for Acquisitions, Best Buy program. He actually initiated a number of programs that the current Undersecretary, Frank Kendall, is expanding on, which have put us in a much stronger position for analysis and prioritization. And the fact is, as you note, that the budgets are smaller, the resources are fewer, the uncertainty is hanging over us, so we don't have any choice. And that's a reality that we are dealing with that actually is not all bad either for us. So there's not a higher priority here than to get this right for the reasons you note. I mean, that's a third of our budget when you look at acquisitions, procurement, research, testing, development, and so on. So I think that we're on the right track here. Long way to go, more to do, much more to do. On the furlough issue, first, we've not made a final decision on this. We have let our people know, and the Congress know, because by law we have to inform the Congress if we're considering any furloughs, and we've done that. We're having to. We're going to do everything we can to protect that element of our budget, but readiness is our key responsibility, and so everything has to revolve around that. We'll probably be in a position in 2 or 3 weeks to have a better sense of what's going to happen, or whether we're going to be required to furlough or not. But there's some good news there. It's coming down from what we originally thought might be the case, 21 days, now to 14. We'll see. Let me, in the interest of time, ask our comptroller to address your specific point on civilian workforce.
We have worked hard to restructure our civilian workforce, Mr. Calvert, and it'll be coming down about 5 to 6% between fiscal 13 and fiscal 18, pretty much in proportion to the reductions we're seeing on the military side. I will say those reductions are contingent on being able to consolidate infrastructure and also to restructure our military treatment facilities. So we will need the background in order to achieve those cuts, because that's where they work. And if we're going to cut civilians without hurting readiness, we need to do some efficiencies. But we are on track to achieve a 5 to 6% cut in 13 to 18.
Mr. Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, the tragedy yesterday is just the latest reminder that the world we live in is still a dangerous place. And while we are all budget conscious, and we know the department is too, and has to be, I think I'm correct that in noting the President's budget request that came last week, there was just 0.5% increase in DOD's budget, but other departments in government, HHS, a 5.4% increase, veterans, 10%. I don't think anyone on this committee would argue with that. Department of Energy, 35% increase. Department of Commerce, 34%, and DOT, 50%. So there are some areas of government that the administration is still looking to grow. And I want to focus my two questions on helicopters and on ships. Because going to the comment that I believe General Dempsey made with regard to Mr. Moran's question about the Mi-17 helicopter, that was the right helicopter for the Afghanis. I want to talk about the right helicopter for the Americans, for our Army, and for our Army National Guard. It's my understanding that an American-made helicopter, the UH-72 Lakota, which is one of the few programs, going to Mr. Calvert's comment about acquisitions, that has never been late and that has never been over budget, that your budget request, administration's budget request, is talking about cutting the planned purchase order of those helicopters down from what we were hoping or were expecting, we had been told would be 31 down to 10, and that furthermore you don't plan to purchase the additional 10. That goes to Ms. McCollum's question about industrial base. These are American jobs in Columbus, Mississippi, not in my state or district, but they're American jobs nonetheless. So it does have an issue with regard to industrial base. And I'm just curious, is the helicopter still doing a good job for our Army and our National Guard? And if so, could you help us understand the strategy here? And then with regard to ships, the Secretary talked about, in response to Chairman Rogers' question, about the issues with China and Philippines and other areas in the Pacific. I think the quote was that we still are the most significant Navy in the Pacific. We need to be, and clearly it is our intent to ensure that those sea lanes remain open in regard to Mr. Rogers' question about world commerce. So in a recent hearing, that was closed, so I won't cite who it was with, but it was a senior Navy official. We were talking about the littoral combat ship. I was recently just a few days ago with one of the Navy secretaries when President Reagan was in office, when we were aiming toward a 600 ship fleet. Obviously, we are nowhere close to that. But the littoral combat ship, one of the two, is made in my district, so it's a parochial question, but the question really falls along the lines of this. The world's not a safe place, and can you see with a smaller Navy the need, especially when we're talking about sea lanes or piracy or other issues, can you see the continued need? Previous secretaries and previous departments have recommended this ship. This Congress has funded this ship, and I at least believe that in countries like Singapore, Cambodia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and other areas, having smaller ships that are more versatile, that go into the shallow waters, can provide some advantage to us as we're trying to do more with less in other parts around the world. So those are my two questions, and I would welcome a response.
Congressman, thank you. On the issue of the amount of the Defense Department budget, if I recall, I think both the House and the Senate resolutions on the Pentagon budget, DoD budget, was pretty close to where the President's budget is. So I think the President's budget is right in line with what the House and the Senate proposed for FY 2014. As to the specific questions on ships and helicopters, I would answer it this way. First, the recognition, realization that, as you noted, we've got less money. And so therefore, with less money, we're going to have to prioritize where we think our most significant assets are and invest in those to fulfill the national security interest of our country. I don't know a 600-ship Navy versus 300-ship Navy. I suspect I'd take the 600-ship Navy. But with a 600-ship Navy comes maintenance and all the rest. It isn't just buying the ship. It's all that goes with it. And then you got to man the ship. The reality is that we have to always look at, aside from the limitations of your resources, if you've only got so much money, and you've got an Air Force to deal with, and an Army, and Marines, so you've got so much money to go around, is the capability and quality of the asset. The capability and quality of our assets today, in almost every case, are far superior than they were 30 years ago on these ships. Now, I suppose more is better, but we have to balance all of that, and we do. It's not an easy task for those charged with that, and again, keeping our focus on what is the requirement of the Department of Defense, and how do we assure the fulfillment of that requirement to secure this country and to protect the interests of this country. And within the range of the resources we have and the decisions we've got to make and the funding of all the different departments, it's not an easy task, but I think our people over the years have done a tremendous job of balancing this.
Well, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, I wasn't trying to go back to the 600 Fleet Navy. I was just saying that was a direction. At one point, we were going 30 years ago. The world is different. I was really asking you to give me some insight, and if, because of the newness of your position, if you want to defer to either Secretary Hale or to General Dempsey, I'd be happy to hear from either of them as well. But I was really looking to I'm trying to understand the strategy about the helicopters. These are helicopters that are made in America that are supporting our Army and our National Guard, and by all accounts are doing an outstanding job, and yet we're recommending that we're going to be cutting if we cut the helicopters down, we're cutting the productions down as well, and we'll eventually put those Americans out of work. And then about the littoral combat ship, that is a part of a smaller fleet. Do you see a value of new technology like the LCS in a smaller Navy?
Well, I'll let General Dempsey respond directly to both weapons systems. But again, I go back to if you've got only a limited amount of resources, it isn't always just the question of are all the weapon systems working, are all the helicopters working, would you buy more, or planes or ships? You probably would, but we've got to prioritize the resources that we have, what the needs are on the ground. We factor in, as I noted earlier, on combatant commanders' decisions, are people that we rely on in the Navy, in the Air Force, on the ground, in the Army and Marines. What do they need? What is the baseline to fulfill the capabilities and readiness and interest of our national security? That doesn't always come out maybe the way everybody wants, but we're limited to that reality as well. Let me ask General Dempsey.
I'll just add, Mr. Secretary, the Lakota is a fine helicopter, but it's really a helicopter designed to operate in a passive environment. And one of the principles going forward in the Strategic Choices Management Review is we've got to find platforms that are multi-role, that have the capability to operate both in a hostile and a passive environment. And the Secretary's given us the ability to look at several different alternative futures in terms of financial support. The President's budget, something halfway between there and sequestration and full sequestration. And I think you're going to see some pretty dramatic changes based on the early indicators of things that are not multi-role will be very difficult to invest in.
Thank you.
Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's getting late, so I want to try to whip through some things here. First of all, with regard to Ms. McCollum's comments on the sexual abuse, I know there's a pilot program where the Air Force is providing special victims counsel to act as personal legal counsel for sexual assault victims. So I have a couple questions I'll submit for the record, and hopefully you gentlemen, and General, I appreciate your comments on that issue, you too, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. There's a program called the Mind Fitness Training that the Mind Fitness Training Institute is doing, and it's a training program that the Marines and the Army are doing with regard to preparing them for performance. But this is also helping them deal with the stress of combat and how to process a lot of what they're doing there. And it's the MFIT is the name of the program, and it's a great program. We're starting to see some pilot studies come on, not only to help in preparation in the training aspect, but we're also beginning to see in other areas where this is helping with post-traumatic stress. And I know that it's much more expensive, I think 3.5 times more expensive to deal with a vet with post-traumatic stress as opposed to a veteran who does not have post-traumatic stress. So I think this is, we're seeing signs that this can begin to build mental resiliency in the soldier, and I think save us some money in the long run. So thank you to Secretary Panetta, who is very supportive, General, and I know General Amos and General Odinero are also supportive of that. So I wanted to just bring that to your attention and say thank you. Also, I represent Youngstown, Ohio, Mr. Secretary, that landed the National Additive Manufacturing Institute, and the Department of Defense is taking the lead on this with Energy, Commerce, National Science Foundation, NASA. And I think this is going to be transformational for manufacturing in general, but also to drive down costs in the Department of Defense. So I want to thank you for that as well. One further comment and then a question. So there was an article in Roll Call this morning that highlighted an issue that hits close to home in the 13th Congressional District. And the article was the U.S. Air Force's billion-dollar mistake. And it talked about the U.S. Air Force's decision to award the light air support contract to the Brazilian-based Embraer over Wichita, Kansas-based Beechcraft. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this. And Beechcraft is in Kansas, and it depends upon a strong supply chain that covers 38 different states. The real party that benefits from this LAS award is the Brazilian government, which has operational direction in Embraer. And it also happens to put Brazil in control of U.S. national security asset, which at the same time putting at risk about 1,400 highly skilled U.S. jobs. Now, Beechcraft protested the LAS award because of concerns with the way the procurement went down. But the automatic stay triggered by law was overridden by the Air Force. So the initial contract to deliver 20 planes to Afghanistan has a current ceiling of $950 million. However, what's most concerning is the global marketplace for LAS aircraft. So two things here. the single acquisition will become the program of record for the BPC of partner states, and the Air Force has stated in congressional testimony that as many as 27 countries may purchase this aircraft through BPC. Even modest projections suggest the potential value of this award could be as high as $10 billion. So I don't believe that the initial award should have been made to Embraer, and I have concerns about the fairness of the procurement. But there's also a cruel irony here. The last 6 years, Brazil has refused to extradite an American citizen who murdered her husband, Carl Herrig, who was a combat veteran pilot. Carl lived in my congressional district. We've been working with the State Department and doing everything we could possibly do to try to get her extradited here, to come back here and face justice. They have thumbed our nose. They have thumbed their nose at us in this process. And so it's difficult for me, as someone who's been dealing with this, and the Herrig family back in Ohio, to see the Brazilian government thumb their nose at the State Department, and then the Defense Department is giving them this huge contract. Considering the consequences of manufacturing for Brazil now, and it becomes a program of record, can you personally review this award and make an independent determination on whether it should be allowed to stand as the program of record?
Congressman, thank you. First, as you know, I did not see the story in roll call, but as you know, this is under protest. The GAO is reviewing it. That's the current status of the project.
Can you take a look at this too, personally?
Yes, especially, I did not know about the other part of this, your constituent in the Brazilian government, and what you just laid out.
Yeah, and, you know, I mean, you've served here. You know how this goes.
I will.
And
I will. I did not know about that.
Yeah, and we've been working closely with the State Department, and if we could hook up after and talk to your staff member who will deal with this, and we can get you connected with the state. But to me, it's just so frustrating. Here they are ignoring our request. This man served our country, and we don't know what happened in Boston, but here now Brazil is a safe haven for a terrorist who could commit an act of terror or kill a vet in the United States and go to Brazil and not be extradited here. I didn't want to get this much into it, but this is a major issue in my district, and I think a major issue in the country. So I thank you for everything, and we'll...
I will look into it, and I will get back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Secretary, good to see you. It really is
Thank
good to have
you.
you back in the Hill. Appreciate your service in and out of uniform and in so many different capacities. I know you'll do a great job for the President and for all of us. Two quick questions. One, I want to, having praised you like my good friend Mr. Moran did, let me not ask as tough a question, but pick up on his last question. I've got exactly the same concerns about the civilian workforce. I appreciate the fact that we've been able to lower the number of furlough days. I know you're continuing to work on that. But I'm also curious why the $180,000 funded through the Working Capital Fund, and that saves no direct appropriations, are being furloughed at the same rate. In other words, is there some argument, are you simply trying to treat all civilians alike regardless, or given the fact that some jobs are more important than others and some are funded in different ways, is there room here for some sort of more individualized response, if you will?
Thank you. Nice to see you again, Congressman. On the furlough issue, there will be exceptions for priority jobs, safety, security, expertise, and so on, if we have to do that. That said, what we have tried to do in approaching this is be fair and try to come at this in a way that's across the board, with the exceptions that I noted and others. If we have to do this, and it's still if, and if we have to do it, then we still don't know how long, then that's the approach that we will continue to take.
One additional question, because I know we have very limited time, but I'd like to get your thoughts. I look at the entire forces. I know you and certainly General Dempsey do, and it's a remarkable force, and it's been well led and wonderfully trained and well equipped, and I think highly of it. On the other hand, I do sometimes worry about the concentration at senior levels that we have now compared to earlier times in our history. We have a lot more 4 stars today than we've had, vis-a-vis a force this size. So do you have any plans in terms of re-looking at whether or not we've got an oversized general officer corps and to take that into account? I know you've got some tough downsizing to do in terms of capability over the next several years. Is that going to include the higher ranks as well?
I'll respond to that, but I'm going to allow General Dempsey to respond as well, since this is probably more of a parochial issue for him.
We want to keep you, General Dempsey.
Which I would strongly support. You know, just briefly, that my predecessors instituted a review, and that review came up with some suggestions, which is underway on downsizing that senior leadership. But also, I would say, and again, I'll ask the chairman to respond, that in the strategic choices and management review that I have asked for, they'll be looking at all of these issues, because infrastructure, our formations, our entire force structure, how it's led, the commands, have to be looked at and reviewed, and they will be. That will all be part of the strategic review. General Dempsey.
As I remember the numbers, the Secretary Gates's efficiencies review identified about 144 generals and flag officers for their positions to literally go away by attrition. We are looking again, because as the force comes down, the ratio changes. We're also looking not just at individual positions and numbers of generals and flags, but at headquarters. We are a bit overstructured. We didn't get there out of any malfeasance. We got there because there were requirements, and as this budget now comes upon us in the Secretary's Strategic Management Review, we'll take a look at where we think we can do less with less, but not less well.
Well, not to over-dramatize the point, but recently read a wonderful book by Adrian Goldsworthy, who's a great Roman historian, talked about the evolution, and a great historian of the Roman army, and talked about the long-term evolution where there got to be more and more units of smaller and smaller size and more individual commands, but less mass, if you will. And I just hope that we avoid that problem as you guys wrestle with what a really tough set of challenges. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Mr. Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to go back to the 24th CST issue again. We've been in contact with the governor's office, Governor Cuomo, and he's indicated they've received notices within the last week to disestablish this unit. Will they be receiving a notification that has now been withdrawn?
I have reversed the initial decision, and that is why we will keep the funding for both of those offices.
And I understand that you've testified to that earlier today, but will a notice go out to the state of New York is really my question.
Oh, of course.
Yes,
of course.
good.
Yeah,
Thank you. That resolves it from my perspective. I wanted to ask you also about the missile defense proposal for the Northeast. Can you give me an update as to the status of that? There have been some recent stories that indicate that Fort Drum, which is in my district, and the former Griffiths Air Force Base are on the potential list.
We, as you know, are undertaking an environmental study. We are looking at different sites as directed by the National Defense Authorization Act to review potential East Coast sites. We are looking at those, and we should have, and I'll ask General Dempsey to be more specific, we should have that study concluded here, I would suspect, by the end of the year. General Dempsey.
The only thing I'd add, Mr. Secretary and Congressman, is that the environmental impact study shouldn't be taken to assume that we will, in fact, establish an East Coast missile field for the ground-based interceptor, because we have other options. We have other options to include sea-based. But we want to do the work to understand where we could conceivably place an East Coast missile field in the event that the threat continues to increase, or if we decide that the sea-based capability would be inadequate. But we're not there yet.
Thank you. Obviously, from my perspective, there are 3 sites, one in Maine, I believe, as well. Fort Drum is, I believe, the only active installation, and just from an economic perspective, it would seem to me that that would be the best location, because it does have all of the infrastructure associated with an operating installation. My last question goes to BRAC. Mr. Secretary, in the beginning of your testimony, you indicated that I think you cited $12 billion had been saved as a result of the BRAC. Having come from a community that went through a BRAC, certainly our impression of the process was that ultimately it became a political decision and not an objective decision. And I'm curious as to what steps you would see taking in order to ensure that this was a fact-based and not a politically based decision. Very difficult, I understand, but my community, which had Plattsburgh Air Force Base in it, felt very aggrieved by this process. Would be very difficult for me to vote for authorization of a BRAC as a result, because we did not feel it was a fair deal, if you will.
Well, thank you. You, of course, know the system very well after living through it. I said in my opening statement that it was an imperfect system, and I think everyone understands that. Now, that said, our responsibility here within the DoD, as you know, is in fact to do exactly what you said, to work through the facts, what we think we need to fulfill the commitments to the American people to secure this country. Is there excess overhead structure? You know all the reasons for it. And so our focus is on just that reality. The community involvement is obviously an important part of this. I noted that in my statement. You know, you've gone through it. Because everyone has to be engaged in this and involved in this process. Open, transparent, fair. And then you know the system as it works out, and then it's then the BRAC Commission itself takes all of this and then makes recommendations to the Congress, and then, as you know, you have one plan to vote up or down. It is imperfect. I know that there are problems, there are issues, but I don't think that means that we shouldn't go forward with trying to make this work. The fact is that we are unwinding now over almost 12 years of 2 wars. We have built up a force structure to fight those 2 wars. And all that is coming out of this, and we've already shut down and consolidated a number of bases in Europe, overseas. We'll do more. We've got another study coming out later another review coming out later this year on that. We've tried to obviously focus there first. But I think the infrastructure and overhead has to be looked at. And then it's in the hands of the policymakers. So I know that probably doesn't reassure you of anything, but I think because of those imperfections and those problems, we shouldn't go forward with it. We've tried to get better and smarter at it. We've been doing this a few times over the years, and I think every time I hope we do it better. Doesn't mean if we would get the authorization to go forward that it wouldn't be without some problems. But we learn something every time. But we've got to address excess infrastructure and overhead. It's all part of the larger review, that we just can't afford everything that we're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Gentlemen, I thank you for your testimony here today and for your service to our country. Thank you.
Mr. Womack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, would like to thank the gentlemen for their outstanding records of service to our nation and what they continue to do to help us in very difficult times. I want to go first to General Dempsey. You talked earlier, sir, about what you called a readiness shortfall. This is a sequester question, and I think you referred to the effects of a readiness shortfall based on sequester to involve pretty serious what you called recovery costs. I kind of referred to that recovery cost as more or less an effect of hollowing out the force. I think we're basically saying the same thing. You indicated that calculating those recovery costs might be a little bit difficult, although there are metrics in place, I think, to do some of that. I think we would all agree that we do know there will be recovery costs. It's a terribly inefficient way to run the military. So my question is, are you concerned that when we are finally able to determine those recovery costs, that they may manifest themselves maybe not so much in dollars, but in lives on a future battlefield?
Yes.
Which leads to my second question, and I appreciate I could not agree more. And I think that Chairman Rogers, in previous hearings, in discussing the effects on sequester and the criticality of what we were able to do in that last piece of legislation was very, very important for our nation's military. But my last question, I'll just kind of throw to Secretary Hagel. Forget for a moment that you're in a hearing room on Capitol Hill. And consider that you're sitting in a town hall meeting in the 3rd District of Arkansas, maybe out in one of my rural areas. And you're talking to a group of people, some of whom are wearing the hats of a proud World War II veteran, some of whom fought in Vietnam or Korea or Desert Storm, Somalia, Panama, you name it, the current war on terror. And in this audience, there are probably going to be parents of kids who are going to graduate with a class of 2013. Some of those kids are going to put their hand up and take the oath of enlistment. Others will be entering our service academies. How can we assure them, with the uncertainty of sequestration, that the military that was defended by America's greatest generation, the country defended by America's greatest generation, and the country that's going to be defended by future men and women is going to be the best manned, best equipped, best trained, best maintained, and best cared for military that our country is known for?
Congressman, thank you. Since I won't be around that long, few of us will be, as that emerging class gets through the academy and then moves on to senior level positions within this country. But I would respond this way. The one unabiding confidence that I've had in this country, and I'm 66 years old, I've been in a war, done a lot of different things, made a lot of mistakes. But one confidence that I have never lost sight of, and it strengthens every day, is the fiber and character of this country to do the right thing. We stumble around occasionally. We fight like hell. But in the end, we do the right thing for our country, for our future, and for mankind. And I do believe, I certainly hope, but I do believe that that will be there for a long time to come. And it is much because of the public service of people like you all and others, and General Dempsey, who's been in the service for 39 years. And when you look at credibility and confidence and trust in people and institutions, this institution, having nothing to do with me, is the one institution still in this country today that has a very high degree of trust and confidence. All other institutions are this way, except the military and the men and women. So I depend on that. I believe in that, and I think that would be my answer. And then it gets to the individual. What is your purpose in life? What do you want to do with your life? And I have great and unabiding confidence in our young people.
Appreciate the gentleman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Kapler.
Thank you. You can all breathe a sigh of relief. I think I'm the last member. Mr. Secretary, we congratulate you warmly on your appointment. General Dempsey, thank you for your phenomenal service to our country. And our Secretary Dale, thank you so very much for being here today. I wanted to mention 4 points and follow on with questions. You can respond to any directly or for the record. I want to focus on neurological conditions affecting our troops and veterans. Number 2, the role of the Guard and Reserve in structuring future defense for cost savings purposes and excellent service. Number 3, DoD's role in the imperative of national energy independence, which was not mentioned in your testimonies. And finally, the downsizing of defense and economic recovery in regions of our country that still are hurting greatly from the downturn. Number 1, on neurological conditions affecting our troops, General Dempsey, thank you for addressing that in your testimony. I wanted to point out the excellent work Colonel Castro is doing at Army Medical and Material Command. It's path-breaking. And I wanted to ask if in the President's new BRAIN initiative, which is to be funded at a level, if we're successful, of $100 million, half that funding coming from DARPA. In reading through some of the material that's come to my attention, all of the research institutes involved in that are on the coasts. In our region of the country, nothing. And we have many of our citizens who enlist in the military or the Guard and Reserve. And I would hope that as DARPA's role in this is shaped, you will think about the all parts of our country being linked somehow in this tremendous effort that can help both on the military side as well as on the civilian side. So just FYI on that. Number 2, on the role of the Guard and Reserve for future defense. I'm wondering how you are structuring the full integration in your discussions as we deal with these budget realities of Guard and Reserve. And I'm going to give you an arithmetic question, very micro, that might help illustrate this issue. If one looks at the F-16 unit that's based in Ohio, obviously my home state, and we would compare the cost of fulfilling the mission in Poland on F-16 with F-16s, which is currently being done by UCOM, what would be the cost savings to shift that effort to a Guard unit, in this case Army Air Guard? What would be the cost differential? The same is true with the repair of that equipment. What would be the difference between doing it within active duty forces versus the Air Guard in Ohio? Just 2 arithmetic questions. You don't have to answer that now, but for the record. Number 3, on energy independence. No one knows more than our military, certainly the Marine Corps, about the cost of delivering fuel to the front lines or energy to the front lines. The fact that you haven't even mentioned that in your testimony is a deep concern to me, because I view our lack of energy independence as heavily influencing the conundrums we face globally. And I would hope that in answer back to us for the record, you could provide some focus for what the department is doing. And many of its departments are heavily involved in research, in energy retrofits for its buildings to save money long term, and it wasn't mentioned at all. In that regard, let me also ask for comment. In the solar industry, which is critical to our future, the Chinese have been dumping solar panels globally, and it is causing tremendous outfall in this industry for our country, coast to coast, and the intellectual property that is associated with that, some of which came out of the military, some of it came out of NASA, is at risk. I just wanted to place that on the record for you to think about. And my final point is, as we downsize, some states have a lot of investment for MILCON, for defense. Ohio is not one of those states. We rank near the bottom in terms of military construction, yet if you look at our enlistment rates, if you look at the patriotism of the people of our state, they've always been shortchanged, in my view, in terms of defense investment. I would hope that as you look at downsizing around the country, there will be some factor that's considered at the policy level of which areas of the country are still struggling to recover, maybe those that are heavily manufacturing and very tied to the defense industrial base of this country, and the lack over a long period of time of defense-related investment, be it direct bases or R&D for the future. Just to make you aware of that concern. If you want to respond to any one of these points, I would would welcome your comments.
Congresswoman, thank you. You've touched on four important points. We will respond for the record and answer each of your questions and points and expand on some of the commentary that you provided here and your concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I would hope on the first one, neurological research and so forth, I hope there's a way for Dr. Castro's excellent work to be linked to whatever DARPA is going to do so that we can bring current practice and join it with futuring in terms of neurology. I think there's a real chance to do that, but they've got to be connected.
We will specifically address that point.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary, the chairman has several questions, but in the interest of time, I'm going to submit them and ask that you respond, if you would, please. And actually, the last member is not Ms. Kapler, but Mr. Kingston.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I had a question that I wanted to submit for the record, and it has to do with the purchasing in 2009 by the aircraft of the G222 cargo planes in Italy that are from an Italian company. We've spent $550 million on the training and the aircraft and the maintenance, and not all of the 20 were delivered, but the Afghanis did not like them, and now they're demanding that we have C-130s, which I understand the contract has been canceled, and we're moving to the C-130s. And my question is, was this properly vetted to begin with? Because we spent a lot of money on that mistake, and it seems very odd that, going to an Italian company over an American company that would be in that position. So it's a question for the record. The other question is, on the C-5Ms, that is the largest cargo plane that goes the longest distance and can carry the most in terms of the American fleet, correct? And I was wondering if you could send me a comparison on that to the C-17. Which one, I know the C-5M is doing really well these days, and would like to know more about it compared to the C-17, and would like that for the record. Also, even though you're reducing the number of civilians at the Pentagon, you would still have 70,000 more at the Pentagon than we had in 2007. And so I'm curious as to what is the justification for that. Why are they there? What's their activity? Because as we reduce troops by 100,000, it seems like disproportionately we're not reducing the civilians. And there must be an explanation for that, and would love to know. And then finally, in terms of the fee increases for TRICARE Prime, what is the average premium right now? Do you know offhand?
Well, as you know, those over 65, I believe it's zero. It's zero.
And what
And then it's for the
Okay, what is, say, what is a,
under
somebody 50
65?
years old, a family, a veteran family,
I think
50-year-old?
around 500
500
a year.
a year?
Mhm.
And what would their civilian equivalent be paying, say, a family of 4, same age?
Private.
It'd be about $6,000
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, it'd be at least 5,000, probably more.
As you touched this, and Secretary Westphal had testified before a committee last year about the same situation, it appears that often the VSOs, immediately jump on it, and I understand that's their job, but it would appear that that number of $500 a year versus $6,000, that people would understand that as health care goes up, no one likes it, but premiums do go up. Do you know how, off the top of your head, how often these premiums have increased since, I think it was 1996? That
Twice.
Twice?
Twice, I think. Yeah, I think twice.
Do you plan to have a discussion on this? And the only reason why I say that is every year, every administration, regardless of party, as you remember, suggests fee increases at the Department of Agriculture for plant inspection, and then routinely Congress ignores them. But I'm wondering if we're doing the same thing in this testimony, where you're suggesting fee increases, but there's no real effort in it. And the only reason why I say that is because military retirees and veterans understand that health care is going up, and they understand the issues that we're all faced with in terms of budget. But I'm not sure that they're being quite informed that since 1996 there have been 2 premium increases, and you're looking at a family of 4 paying $500 versus $6,000. And just are you going to put effort into that discussion? Would be my question.
Yes, we are. I noted, and you know this, and you alluded to it, and everyone on this panel knows it. This is a tough issue. There are a lot of interest going the other way on this. And I understand it's a tough issue. I was, as you mentioned, I was on your side of the dais once, so I appreciate that. But my point here is, and I think it again gets to your overall long-term point, if we're going to be able to sustain this program, it's not unlike Social Security and Medicare and the entitlements that you're all dealing with here. If we're going to be able to sustain this for the long term, then we're going to have to make some adjustments and get real about this. And yes, we're going to have to push this and make the best case, and then it's up to the Congress.
I think the kind of openness and frankness hasn't been there, and it needs to be there in terms of the family discussion, if you will. And then my last question, Mr. Chairman, which you may know off the top of your head, what has been the increase in military health care spending? Do you have any numbers for the last 5 years? Or
We have, and actually there's some good news in that too, but let me ask the comptroller to give you some of the numbers.
Well, if you go back to 2001, it would have gone from about 19 billion to around 49. The good news is that, go back 2 years ago, it was a little higher than it will be in 14. It would be about 52. So we have managed to slow the growth with the help of the Congress, and but if you go back over a long time, it's still a very large increase.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary, I realize we've gone beyond the time that we had agreed on, but thank you very much for very, very responsive responses to our questions. You can see that this committee has a lot of interest in what you do and what we do, and we take our responsibilities very seriously. And so we are here to support, and we are here to make sure that our country remains ready and that our troops have what they need to stay ready and to protect themselves. So thank you all very much, and this committee is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.